This is Christina Shala, and welcome to another episode of Empowering the Educator Within. In today's video, we're going to take a look at how individualized planners can help a school achieve its supporting goals. Because this video is a continuation of topics that were covered in prior videos, I would recommend that if you haven't already done so, to check out the following videos: educational frameworks, individualized planners, and connecting frameworks and planners. In last week's video, I talked about the language framework and I presented the same 2D and 3D model that you see here. And I also mentioned that the school's core goal was to run language through all curriculums and to bring it to the forefront. In last week's episode, I also illustrated how the planners that I designed supported this core goal. And I also mentioned that there were other factors at play in why the columns were arranged the way that they were. And in this week's video, I'm going to share the school's supporting goals with you and then kind of illustrate how the planners were designed in order to support those in addition to the school's core goal. So the school's supporting goals were, firstly, because it was an IPC school, to ensure that thematic routing was being followed. The second thing was to ensure that the teachers were doing unit plans. So let's say it was over the course of 4 or 5 weeks, but that the unit plans were set up so that you could see what was taking place week by week on the planner. The next goal was to not only ensure that language was running through curriculums, but also that math objectives were being met wherever possible in other subject areas other than math. They also wanted to ensure that teachers were planning collaboratively and that the modern foreign language teachers and the ELL teachers were using the CFR as a guide to evaluate the language skills of students. And then lastly, to ensure that support staff, whether it be the ELL teachers or the learning support teachers, were tying whatever they were doing to the school's curriculums. To illustrate how the school's supporting goals were met, I'm going to use the same planners that I showed in the previous video, which were the planners from the mainstream teacher, the modern foreign language teacher, and the ELL teacher. In looking at the mainstream teacher's planner, you'll note that 4 out of the 6 supporting goals could be met because goal 5 and 6, those two didn't apply to them. So we'll start with number 1. And if you take a look next to the 1, it requires the teacher to note the thematic unit name. And this was to meet the first supporting goal, which was to ensure that teachers were following a thematic routing. The second goal, next to the 2, you'll see it's sort of on that black row there. It says week 1. Now, if you were to imagine the planner extending vertically, it will go week 1, week 2, week 3, etc. And this is so that as the teachers were planning over the course of 4 or 5 weeks, the entire unit, that they would need to break down week by week what they would be covering. And then, if you note, the number 3 is sort of in between 2 columns. It's in between the Cambridge English language learning objectives and the mathematics learning objectives. And then if you will take a look at column number 1, which kind of goes through different subject areas, you'll see, social studies, and then you can imagine, science and math and etc. Coming down vertically. And what the teachers were required to do was for each subject area, they would have to, for example, in social studies, what are some language objectives that might be met in social studies? What are some mathematic, objectives that could be met in social studies? The same thing for science. What language objectives could be met in science? What mathematic objectives could be met in science? And in doing so, not only did that ensure that language was running through all curriculums, which is, as I mentioned in the other video, was the school's core goal, but it also helped to meet that supporting goal. And then the same thing would apply for math. It would help the school meet that supporting goal because through every single subject, math objectives would be tied into them. And then lastly, if you look at the number 4, it's in the vocabulary grammar column. Now this is a bit of an overlap again from the previous video when I referred to it because it ensured that language was running through all curriculums and it was in this the center and at the forefront. But it also helped the school to ensure their supporting goal, which was to ensure that teachers work collaboratively, because the mainstream teacher needed to put that information in so they could hand that information over to the modern foreign language teacher, the librarian, to support staff. And so in that way, that forced teachers to meet together and plan collaboratively. Moving on to the Modern Foreign Language Teachers Planner, you'll note that, again, not all 6 supporting goals could be met by them, only goals 1 through 5. Let's start with goal number 1, which was to ensure that all teachers were following the IPC's thematic routing set by the school. So just to give you a little bit of background, when you take a look at what the IPC sets out specifically for modern foreign language teachers, they don't provide them with actual units per se that they need to follow. So in order to make sure that the modern foreign language teachers were in line with IPC's routing, having that first section there where they need to actually identify what unit they connect to required them to look at the mainstream teacher's planner. Now, as I mentioned in the last video, imagine that the mainstream teacher is covering Olympics in social studies. That could be something that the modern foreign language teacher would be like, hey, yeah, I can connect to that. We can talk about sports. We can learn sport vocabulary. Not only does the modern foreign language teacher's planner require them to list the unit that they're going to connect to, but you'll notice that in column 2, it says links to other learning objectives. And that's so they can take a look at the mainstream teachers' planners and the goals that they're meeting and see if there's anything that they can tie into and reinforce and support in their classes. And in that way, there's a clear connect and consistency among what's taking place in the modern foreign language class and the mainstream teachers class. And just to mention, this column was not only on the modern foreign language teachers planner, but it was also on all the specialist teachers planners to ensure that everything was connecting to the IPC thematic routing. Moving on to the school's second goal of weekly planning as they were creating their unit planners, you'll note that this planner, to be consistent with the mainstream teachers planner, goes week by week by week vertically. Now, the school's third supporting goal was to ensure that language and mathematics run through all subject areas. Now, because the modern foreign language teacher had, or teachers had their own set of language objectives, that column was left out. However, you'll note that the mathematics column was left in. And this was to ensure that if there was a way that they could connect to what was happening in the mainstream teacher's classroom in mathematics, that they did so. So, for example, let's say the class was covering measurement, and the modern foreign language teacher has decided they're going to go with the Olympics theme. They could tie in measurement by having the students maybe design a stadium and, put in the measurements of how big it would be in meters or kilometers, and sort of teach them those key vocabulary words in a foreign language as well, and even go over, counting, so that they could not only name the units of measurement, but they could also say the numbers in foreign language. Moving on to the school's fourth supporting goal, which was to ensure that the teachers were working collaboratively. You'll note that column number 1 starts with vocabulary and grammar. And as I mentioned in my prior video, that was to ensure that language was running through the center of everything at the school on the school's language framework. But not only did it ensure that that was taking place, but it also ensured that collaboration was taking place, because, as mentioned, if the modern foreign language teacher didn't go to the mainstream teacher to get the information that they needed, they couldn't start their planning. And then lastly, goal number 5 was for the modern foreign language teachers to be using the CFR to evaluate students' language proficiency. And so on the planner, you'll note that there are columns for the teachers to plan out not only objectives, but also to do their lesson planning, so that it would tie into those goals specifically for their students. And lastly, let's take a look at how the ELL teachers' planners were designed in order to allow them to meet the school's supporting goals. Now, as mentioned in the last video, the role of the ELL teachers was to help students in accessing the curriculum across all subject areas, so math, social studies, science, etc. So in order to allow the ELL teachers to do this, their planner was very much in line with the mainstream teacher's planner. So you'll note that number 1 is the same as the mainstream teacher. They needed to put the IPC thematic unit, and that would have been easy enough. They just look at what the mainstream teacher's doing and align themselves accordingly. And then number 2 was weekly planning. And much the same as the mainstream teacher's planner, you'll note there's week 1 and the planner extended vertically in the same way, week 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. And then again, to be in line with the mainstream teacher planner, you'll note that the same columns are there to note Cambridge English learning objectives and the Cambridge mathematics learning objectives. So the ELL teacher could take a look at the mainstream teacher's planner and take a look at ones that they were planning to tie into, and then the ELL teacher could decide what would be feasible for their students to also work towards in, for example, social studies or science, etc. And then the school's 4th goal, again, was collaborative planning. And so column number 1 starts with vocabulary grammar. And again, the ELL teacher would need to go take a look at the mainstream teacher's planner and consult with them to see what they were doing in their classes in order to begin their planning. They needed that information from that last column to start their column and start their planner. And then goal number 5 was to use the CFER to evaluate the ELL students' language proficiency. So columns were placed on the planner for them to do so. And then the last goal, which was to ensure that ELL and learning support staff were tying into the subject areas so they could help students access the curriculum. And so by placing the subject areas on this planner in column 1, and then having them also in column number 2, listing the specific objectives they could help students meet, in that way, the school could ensure that any support being offered was closely tied to whatever was happening in the classrooms, in social, in science, language arts. Aside from helping a school achieve its supporting goals, what are the other benefits of creating individualized planners? In designing individualized planners that help a school meet its core and supporting goals, you end up with a united staff because the planners dictate that everyone move in the same direction. You also end up with empowered teachers who are confident that what they are doing in the classroom is in line with the school's philosophy, because the planners kind of dictate the teaching methods that they need to be using and how they approach teaching in their classrooms. And then lastly, you end up with improved student learning. Because a consistent approach is taken across the board, as students are moving from class to class and teacher to teacher, they are being taught the same way, and there's also clear overlaps between the different subject areas at the school. In order to illustrate how a school's supporting goals could be met through the use of individualized planners, I chose a specific school with a specific set of supporting goals. That said, planners can take on all sorts of different designs. This is by no means the only way. For different examples and ideas that you could use as a base for designing your own individualized planners, you can visit www.shallowbooks.com. On the education blog, you'll see many different examples of ones that I've designed. And you'll also find a link to my book, Empowering the Educator Within, which also has a variety of different examples that you can take a look at. If you're still finding that you might need some additional support, you can always contact me via the website. Always happy to help. Thanks for joining us today. Be sure to tune in to next week's episode of Empowering the Educator Within.